I'll simply highlight a handful of facts from our Who Owns New Zealand fact sheet, which is this one here. Used to be gold, we ran out of that. So let's look at some myths. The great majority of foreign investment, not investment at all, but takeovers, which don't create any new assets. I mean, the technical economic terms is a greenfield investment. You go to a greenfield and you build something. And there's a little bit of that in the so-called foreign investment in New Zealand, but the vast majority, and this is the official record bears this out, is actually coming in, buying up, usually at a bargain basement price, something that New Zealanders have created, built up, and then taking it over, in many cases asset stripping it, cleaning it out, closing it down, etc., or otherwise making the money from it. So it's not investment at all, it's a takeover. One key myth that's promulgated by the likes of English, and if Labour was still in power it would be Michael Cullen would be saying this, is we need their money. Well, actually, transnational corporations make massive profits out of New Zealand. You can see the fact sheet for some figures. So actually, they need our money more than we need theirs. And if we all stop and listen for a minute, you'll hear a sucking sound. And that's the sound of billions of dollars being sucked out of New Zealand. Ever since Roger Douglas said there were no restrictions on money leaving the country in 85. And there was just billions of dollars leaving. Their profits are New Zealand's biggest invisible export and are the main cause of New Zealand's very high current account deficit, which is not, you might be astonished to learn, caused by us spending more than we save. Every time this comes up, this current account deficit, we're told it's because you lazy, stupid, greedy members of the public want flat screen TVs and that and won't save money. No, no, no. It's actually because billions of dollars are being sucked out in profits. That deficit only drops in times of economic crisis when the transnationals New Zealand's profits drop. And this actually happened last year. Due to the global financial crisis, their profits went down, and so in one quarter of the financial year last year, for the first time since the 1970s, New Zealand's current account went into surplus, which the neoliberal economists and their political allies see as being a bad thing. Another key myth is that we need the transnationals for our jobs. No, we don't. They're not big employers. Once again, see our fact sheet for some figures, the vast majority, 4 out of 5, of Kiwi workers work for New Zealand-owned companies, which the transnationals need to enable them to operate their businesses in this country. Once again, they need us more than we need them. And if you say, where'd you get these figures from, what's the basis? Okay, 90s and noughties, the politicians of the likes of Don McKinnon, Mike Moore, that vintage, started going around saying 1 in 3 New Zealanders depend on foreign companies for jobs, owe their jobs to foreign companies. And so we, CAFCA, actually wrote to the government, which was then the national government, and said, where'd you get these figures from? What's your source? We got a letter back saying, a letter, not an email, an actual letter, saying we don't know. But there was a United Nations study on the global economy which we, the New Zealand government, extrapolated to the New Zealand economy. So then we, CAFCA, did what was apparently too difficult for the government to do, and we wrote to Statistics New Zealand and said, how many New Zealand workers work for foreign companies? And back came the answer, 18%. 1-8, not 80. That means that 82% of New Zealand workers do not work for foreign companies. But that's it. 4 out of 5 New Zealand workers do not work for foreign companies. So when Bill English stands up and says we need them to bring money into the country and for jobs, bear these figures in mind. Not only are they not big employers, in many cases they've actively contributed to mass unemployment and or a serious downgrading of New Zealand workers' pay and condition. And telecom is the only example I need to give. They sacked thousands of workers when they were flogged off to the Yanks by good old Richard Prebble, and then more recently they told all their phone technicians within the last 18 months, you're no longer on our books, you don't work for us, you're now contracted out, you have to buy your own van, you have to buy your own equipment, etc. You're now contractors to telecom, you don't work for telecom, don't ring us, we'll ring you. Final myth, particularly relevant in light of the proposed resumption of privatising public assets, is that selling things to foreign owners helps New Zealand's foreign debt problem. No, it doesn't. Despite a quarter of a century of systematic public asset sales, New Zealand's foreign debt has continued to balloon. You'll see once again the fact sheet for some figures. I'll repeat what Roger Douglas said in relation to the sale of state forests, which is worth repeating. I am not sure we were right to use the argument that we should privatise and quit debt. We knew it was a poor argument, but we probably felt it was the easiest to use politically. Now, of course, the foreign takeovers which attract the highest public attention and opposition are those involving rural land. The specifics change from decade to decade. It used to be coastal land, then it was South Island, North Island coastal land, then it was South Island high country stations, as hobby farms and toy farms for the likes of Shania Twain, and forests were all the go during the 1990s forestry boom. One wonders whatever happened to that. They're digging some of those forests out and turning them into dairy farms actually. But the issue remains the same. There has been a quantum change in the past year or so, namely agribusiness transnationals snapping up the current engine room of the economy, namely dairy farms. The most notorious of these was, of course, the attempt by the Chinese Natural Dairy Corporation to buy up the bankrupt North Island dairy farm empire of the lamentable Alan Crafer. And he was the perfect illustration of the craziness of the dairying boom, that every man and his dog got into dairying, and in the case of Alan Crafer, the dog would have been a better bet, I think. As you know, this was one of the few, and certainly the most high profile in recent years, foreign investment applications to be actually rejected by the rubber stamp Overseas Investment Office because it was deemed not to be in the national interest, and because the individuals owning and or controlling natural dairy did not meet what's called the good character criteria of the Overseas Investment Act, which is a polite way of saying they're a bunch of crooks. What was interesting about the whole Crafer natural dairy soap opera was that it obviously caused great disquiet within the ranks of national supporters and voters, many of whom are cockies, of course. Indeed, it caused an obvious difference of opinion at the highest ranks of the national government, with John Key saying that he doesn't want New Zealanders to become tenants in their own country, language that no senior Labour figure has ever used, and with Bill English and Treasury forced to accept in September last year a review of the Overseas Investment Act that did not, contrary to predictions, liberalise it further, but tacked on a couple of cosmetic measures to give the appearance of toughening it up in relation to land sales. The whole Crafer thing has come back into the papers just in the last few days, I see, that I don't know about here in the Dominion, but it was all over the front page of the Herald where I was reading that last week. And they bid to buy 16 farms, which was rejected by the government, but prior to that, Natural Dairy had already bought 4 farms, actually bought them, without any permission, without going through any of the process, and expected it to be retrospectively approved, which the Overseas Investment Office very commonly does as an obliging service for their clients, the transnational corporations. And so the Overseas Investment Office was left high and dry because the government said, no, sorry, the whole deal falls over. And so they've been told they have to return and surrender these 4 farms, presumably to the Crown, for the receivers, I suppose, and have them disposed of. And they've said no. This was front page lead in the Herald the other day. They said, no, these are our farms, we're hanging on to them, and we're going to fight you in court. Not only for the 4 farms, we'll fight you in court for the 20 farms, is what Natural Dairy has said as recently as last week on the front page of the New Zealand Herald. So the poor old Overseas Investment Office, Jesus, we might have to enforce a law rather than simply holding the door open and sort of, shining their shoes or something. So this is an interesting story, actually. Watch this space. The natural dairy bid was just too... No, sorry, the Maori one's and the one I'm going to talk about next. The natural dairy bid was just too egregious for even the Tories and their mates to stomach. And the relentless takeover of our agricultural sector has progressed to the next level with a bid by yet more Chinese transnationals for PGG Wrightson, which is a major New Zealand agribusiness. That's the one with the Maori involvement in today's Dominion. The more perceptive commentators, including unusually Fran O'Sullivan of the New Zealand Herald, have pointed out that the attraction is not the company, PGG Wrightson, but the fact that it has the commercial rights to 90% of the technology on which New Zealand's grass seed manufacturing is based, and that point is emphasised again in today's Dominion. To quote a seed company director speaking to a farmer's paper, having this technology controlled overseas was, quote, like selling 5,000 farms to overseas buyers. Everyone was up in arms when it looked like 20 Crafer farms will be sold to the Chinese, but this is much bigger. So this is happening right now. This is in today's paper. So this is the equivalent, according to an insider, of selling 5,000 farms overseas in one hit, one company, and which controls 90% of the technology in which the New Zealand's grass seed agriculture is based. Every time there is controversy about some particular foreign land purchase, the apologists say, as they always do, well, they can't take the land with them, can they? Quite. And why would they want to, when they can own it here and milk it for all it's worth? Quite literally in the case of dairy farms. What a lazy, stupid bloody argument. Ask Maori what happened when Britain colonised New Zealand. The Poms didn't take the land with them, did they? But that didn't seem to help Maori very much. It's rather like saying Telecom can't take all the phones with it. Once again, why would they want to? They're happy to leave the phones here and take the money with them. We can have the phones. If we don't watch out, New Zealand's agriculture will go the way of the wine industry, which did all the hard work to establish itself as a keystone part of the economy and a player on the world scene, only to be progressively bought out by transnational corporations and to have now been reduced to the level of being a bulk grape grower for foreign booze giants. They don't care if there is overproduction here and a consequent slump in the industry in places like Marlborough, because they can just concentrate on their more profitable operations in other countries. That is the essence of being a transnational corporation. And land sales to foreigners, push this on, Oh no, that's the end of it, all right, go back. And land sales to foreigners, despite being so high profile, it's the one aspect of the issue that TV news crews consistently cover because it offers visuals and an excuse to fly around in helicopters to somewhere attractive outside Auckland. They're only part of, an important part, but only a part nonetheless of a much bigger picture. They pale into insignificance compared to the transnational corporate takeover of just about every sector of the New Zealand economy that you can think of. At most, land sales total several $100 million per year. The natural dairy bit for the Crowfer farms was touted as being for $1.5 billion, but there was never any proof that it had anything like that amount of money. Just one commercial takeover can be worth several $1 billion, for example, a bank buying a bank or an insurance company buying an insurance company. Now, I'm not downplaying the issue of land sales. They're what get the strongest response from New Zealanders of all shades of political opinion, but they need to be placed into context. Who owns and profits from a particular farm, or even a number of farms, those Crowfer farms again, is a matter of local or regional significance at most. Who owns and profits from our banks, supermarkets, media companies, telecommunications companies, airlines, transport companies, and of current significance insurance companies, etc., 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 is a matter of national significance which affects everyone in the country, and in some cases it is a matter of international significance. When looking for examples of why being a branch office economy dominated by transnational corporations is not a good way to run the country, it's hard to know what to leave out. The word telecom comes to mind as a textbook example. Once again, have a look through our material. There is an embarrassment of riches. But I think that a very recent example from October last year will suffice to make my point. The sorry spectacle of the Prime Minister falling over himself to appease Warner Brothers to ensure that the giant American transnational corporation would condescend to continue to film The Hobbit in New Zealand as opposed to Romania was a perfect illustration of the global modus operandi of such corporations, aided and abetted by their local collaborators and facilitated by craven and woefully naive politicians. How appropriate that a film about an imaginary feudal society should be made possible by such a textbook example of modern-day corporate feudalism in action, complete with forelock-tugging grovelling from the powers that be, mass hysteria from the media, and some Oscar-worthy prima donna behaviour by the Knights of the Shire, Sir Peter Jackson and Sir Richard Taylor. The American studio bosses must have been falling over themselves with laughter when they realised that all they had to do to get their own way was to threaten to take their bat and ball and go elsewhere. A standard threat from transnational corporations, sometimes enacted, but much more often used as a bargaining ploy to extract concessions. It has been a standard tactic for decades from the transnational owners of the Bluff aluminium smelter, to cite the most high-profile example. They told Muldoon, put up our power price, secret subsidised power price, we're gone. They've told every government since, put up our power price, we're gone. In 2008, they told the Labour government, you introduce an emissions trading scheme to New Zealand, we're gone. And they haven't gone yet. And every time they said we're going to go, Kafka put out a press release saying, for Christ's sake, go, and shut the door and give us the electricity back, which is they're the single biggest power user in New Zealand. They're the biggest bludger in the country, actually. So John Key made himself personally available when the Hollywood moguls flew into Wellington and proceeded to give them even more tens of millions of taxpayers' dollars, up to 100 million, I think, from memory. Isn't it interesting how politicians and the media never wax indignant about these beneficiaries of such massive corporate welfare, surely the biggest bludgers in the country? It's always some poor bloody teenage solo mother in Maori or something like that who are the biggest bludgers in the country, never these ones. And just for good measure, Key got the labour laws changed so that anyone working in the film industry is now classified as a self-employed contractor, not an employee, which makes things a lot easier for the film industry employers, Sir Richard and Sir Peter, who now has no responsibility for things such as tax, annual leave, sick leave, ACC levies, etc., etc. All of that becomes the responsibility of the worker, the contractor. The hysteria and political overkill was in reaction to one Supreme Court case where a film industry worker had been ruled to be an employee, not a contractor. In fact, so sweeping was the scope of the political gutlessness that even knee-jerk backers of National and the bosses felt uneasy enough to express doubts about it in editorials and columns. Since 1997, Kafka has, along with another Christchurch group, Get Watchdog, jointly organised the Roger Award for the worst transnational corporation operating in Aotearoa, New Zealand. The winner of the latest one for 2010 was announced in Auckland 2 weeks ago. To nobody's surprise, it was Warner Brothers, even though it was a first-time nominee. So in Graham Henry terms, it was the bolter who went straight through the field and won the Melbourne Cup of corporate bastardry. The judge's statement says, the Hobbit affair was an extraordinary example of transnational capital interfering in local politics and overtly influencing the actions of the New Zealand government, which richly deserves its accomplice award. It was an overt display of bullying that humiliated every New Zealander and deliberately set out to do that. Such interference in New Zealand politics sets a precedent for all future negotiations between the New Zealand government and transnational corporations. It won because of its interference in New Zealand politics and governance and treatment of employees and contractors. John Key and his government won the Accomplice Award for their ignoble role in the whole Warner Brothers Hobbit affair. And there's a quote in here from the judges, which is not in my speech. It has apparently given rise to a whole new men's fashion garment trend in Hollywood, Warners of Wellington trousers. They have an arrow printed on the seat and the words, quote, "Kiss here."